Hey gang, you and I are both guests in the ultimate man cave, Bill Wilson's lodge here at the Circle WC Ranch in Texas. Bill, it's great to be here.
Good to have you back.
Good to be talking guns and ammo again.
Oh yeah, we've had some good conversations here. One of the questions that a lot of our viewers ask, and I honestly don't know all the answers to this other than the obvious that lawyers can always use everything against you. But one of the questions that the viewers, I think, would like to know an answer to, and with all your experience, as doing an expert witness work and stuff like that at shootings, what's the pros and cons of carrying factory ammo for self-defense as opposed to carrying hand loads for self-defense?
Well, the big problem that you have with, there are a few problems with hand loads. First, with premium factory ammo like cops carry, whatever load you chose, there's probably some big department that's had it for a while, had a lot of shootings with it, and you can get some feedback on how it actually works on animated targets that are trying to kill you. There's really no database like that with hand-loaded ammo. Hardly anybody gets shot with this stuff. The quality control issue, I'm going to leave that off the table, because I'll tell you, there are hand loaders whose idea of loading ammo is come home from work, open a case of beer, and say, dang it, I'm going to set my all-time record for rounds per hour per beer. And that's going to be quality control issues. I also know some of you craft fine ammunition like Bill does, like the jeweler he used to be, creating fine jewelry. And literally might be better in quality than factory ammo. But basically where you get it from the legal side is two directions. I saw one case in New Hampshire where they made a big deal out of regular bullets aren't deadly enough to satisfy the bloodlust of this officer who had to make his own extra deadly killer bullets. The officer won the case ultimately. Jim Cirillo came out from New York as an expert witness and did a wonderful job for him. But he wound up losing his career over that incident. And I remember thinking the money that he saved on the hand-loaded ammo was not worth what he went through with that BS argument in court. It sounds like BS to us, but remember, we're going to be judged by 12 people who were selected by the other side during jury selection. And remember, jury selection is really jury deselection. All the people who knew about guns are off the jury by the time you get in front of them. And that's an argument I'd rather not have if we can simply get decent factory ammo and take the argument off the table. But the real big one, and the one we can't get past in court, when you have an issue of forensic replicability of gunshot residue testing to determine disputed distance. It's not at all uncommon in self-defense shootings, police or civilian, that they're close enough that whichever party shoots the other, there's going to be some gunshot residue on the clothing or on the skin. Now, if we have identical ammunition that we can test, what's called exemplar ammunition in the courts, we can determine very, very closely how far the gun muzzle was from the individual who was shot. And for example, I had one case in Davenport, Iowa. The guy said the cop shot him for nothing, and when he's asked on the witness stand, "Oh, and how far away were you, sir?" He's like, "Oh, 30 feet, man." Well, what had happened, he had violently attacked the officer, tried to take the officer's gun 3 times, and on the 3rd attempt, the cop shot him. The gunshot residue showed that he was 18 inches off the muzzle of the gun. And that was the clear, hard, indisputable scientific evidence that broke the he said, she said tie. And I don't want to give that up. The classic case on this with hand loads is New Jersey versus Daniel Bias. Bias was one of us. He was a gun guy, a hand loader, an enthusiastic shooter. And his wife was suicidal. He found her standing in the bedroom in front of a mirror, holding the gun like this. And he tried to grab the gun out of her hand. The revolver was cocked, her finger closed on the trigger, and as she jerked away from the movement, bang, the gun went off. Bullet entered here, went about that far, but it was enough. It killed her. He had loaded up a special powder puff load for her because she was very recoil sensitive. Well, the load was in a Federal Plus P 38 special casing, and if you ever shot 38 special Plus P wad cutter, this was semi-wad cutter, from me to the other side of this table, the muzzle flash would cover the distance, and you'd get considerable deposit of gunshot residue. Next day at autopsy, this was supposed to be holding their own gun to their head. There's no gunshot residue in the hair or scalp. Now, we tested that load. We replicated it and tested it. And at this distance from the 6-inch barrel revolver involved, it had stopped producing GSR. It had stopped depositing. That's why the load was so weak for low recoil that it only penetrated as far as it did. But the initial testing was done at the crime lab with exemplar federal 38 special plus P, which of course would have left much more residue. That case went through 3 trials, and the kid was bankrupt from the lawyer's fees at the end of the first one. By the end of the 3rd trial, the 3rd jury compromised on a verdict of involuntary manslaughter, and he wound up doing several years in prison, and of course came out a felon who could never own a gun again. Both of his attorneys, including the public defender who helped him through the second 2, said without question if it had been factory ammunition, it would have been decided one way or another at the very beginning, and that ordeal never would have taken place. At one point, they had gotten criticism for not testing the exact same load. And they said, we went to his house and got some of his hand loads. We tested them, and they deposit GSR too. But he maintained it was a different load that they tested, not what was in the gun. Now, where the problem comes, the reason the prosecution was able to keep out the testing that showed it wouldn't have deposited GSR was a nuclear-grade soundbite. Your Honor, you can't allow this. The defendant manufactured his own evidence. You can't enter that, and under the rules of evidence, you can't. And, when you talk to handloaders about this, they say, well, wait, I have my records. So did he. Mm-hmm. And the argument was, he made those too, Your Honor. Okay, if O.J. Simpson's lawyers came in and said, dismiss the case against my client, it's right here in his own handwriting in his diary, he was in Chicago that night, would you want that evidence accepted? And neither would they. So basically, that happens often enough that I find it to be a real deal-breaker concern with using hand loads for personal defense. Now, people say that's only one case. We've never heard of a case. Really? So you never heard of the George Zimmerman case, where one side is saying he stood over the kid and shot him, and the defense is maintaining, no, he was banging the defendant's head against the concrete when the defendant fired the fatal shot. Well, it was the testimony of Dr. Vincent DeMaio, the famous pathologist, the gunshot residue on Trayvon Martin's hanging hoodie that was hanging with the weight of a beverage can in the pocket and the underlying T-shirt exactly was consistent with Zimmerman's account of desperately firing upwards from a supine position and utterly inconsistent with the state's theory. And if somebody wants to say, well, that's only one case, maybe you remember Ferguson, Missouri in 2014, the city that burned when they said the poor gentle giant was shot with his hands up while he's screaming, don't shoot, by the evil racist policeman. The first gunshot wound on Michael Brown is a wound that shows the gun was approximately in this orientation based on the gunshot residue. The shot was fired while he was attempting to rip that gun out of the officer's hand in the front seat of the patrol car and kill him with it. He takes the hit and he runs. The cop is duty-bound to chase him. This is a man who's just attempted to disarm and murder a police officer. Then the much bigger Brown turns on him, lunges again, and he opened fire and shot him. The gunshot residue told who was telling the truth, and that's why that officer was never indicted. But a public that didn't understand that literally burned the city. Mm-hmm. Now, if that gunshot residue is going to be the hard, incontrovertible scientific proof that shows my innocence, I want it to be there. I don't want to sacrifice it because I'm proud of making my own ammo. And I get it. I've been a hand loader too. Every trophy I ever won with my own ammo was a little bit shinier, and every bit of meat I brought home to my family with ammo I loaded myself was a little bit tastier. I think Bill knows exactly what I'm talking about. But that pride to me is not worth sacrificing a defense that could make the difference whether the next time I see my family it's going to be in the visiting day at the state penitentiary. So for defense, that's why I strongly recommend only factory ammunition that we can get exemplars to prove.
Thank you. That's a
Thank you, Bill.
I had no idea about the residue part of it. I mean, I kind of, felt like, oh well, you're doing your own hand loads because you want it to be deadlier than a factory load. I knew that angle, but I had no idea about that. That's very good information. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bill. It's always a pleasure to get info to folks. Now, I know people get really upset when you tell them the ammo they made to protect their family might not be the best, so I expect the commentary is going to be interesting. But we always do call for your commentary, and we'll look forward to seeing it. We'll all see you back on the Wilson channel, I hope.